sind an der zweite.
Okay.
Ja. So. Guten Tag. Wir versuchen alle kurz zu sagen. Oh, sorry. We spoke German behind the wall here. Of course, I should change to English. We don't have very much time, so I shall be very brief, and I ask everybody later, when we come to questions and answers, that you are also very, very short with your questions. We have a tradition in Central Europe for being long-winded and explain a lot of things. I would try to say questions only. Then, Dr. Fischer, thank you for joining us in Prague in this wonderful palace. And what I dare say, is an important event, the Forum 2000. I am very happy that you are here, also because last year I suggested to Forum 2000 that we try to invite you. Now why? Because I see you, I have been following you since I moved to Vienna in '86. We don't know each other very well. We have met on a couple of occasions. But you always impressed me with your moderation, with your wisdom, with the calm conviction with which you were speaking, even in times which were sometimes difficult. I have seen you, and this is the way I present you to the audience, as a gentleman, as an intellectual, as a Democrat, and as a socialist. I am sure you will have important things to tell us, and we are all waiting for you now to make your lecture. Thank you very much.
Over there?
I don't know. Can you, if you are comfortable there, I think it would be fine. Or if you prefer the podium.
I prefer
yes.
it.
Standing up, that makes a better voice.
Not only, but let me first say that I'm very thankful and I'm very happy to be invited here. I could say, but it is not the full truth, that I'm on my way from Vienna to Innsbruck to give my lecture in political science at the University of Innsbruck, and I made a little detour to Prague, and will go from here to Innsbruck to meet politicians in Prague. I know very well to participate on this forum and to discuss the Prague Spring 1968 and Austria, because I have very intensive and concrete memories on the year 68 and what happened and what did not happen, etc., etc. I came here because I have a manuscript in German, but don't be afraid, it should be possible to have a manuscript in German and nevertheless to speak English. Maybe it will not be so fluent as it should be, but I will do my best. And the second remark, I believe that people can learn from history. There are more or less two ways of thinking, two schools. One group says it's a pity people never learn from history. They make always the same mistakes. And the other school, and I belong to that other school, say we have many possibilities to show that and how and why people learn from history. For instance, the Second Republic of Austria, the development since 1945, would definitely not have been possible in such a way if we wouldn't have learned from the mistakes, from the terrible mistakes of the so-called First Republic between 1918 and 1938. And other examples I could also present. And it is a fact that next year in 2018, we will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I and of the foundation of two, and more than two, new countries, new republics, Czechoslovakia and Austria. Both republics that were the consequence of the end of World War I, of the destruction of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. They were foundations with great optimism, with great hopes on a bright future. But we know history was not straight going to a bright future, on the contrary. The fact that instead of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy of 50 million inhabitants, Austria became a republic with 7 million inhabitants. This is 1/7 of population and roughly 1/7 of territory, was an incredible hit for this young country. It was even called ein Staat, den niemand wollte, a state nobody wanted that it exists. The history of the so-called First Republic, 1918 to 1938, to put it short, ended tragically. The constitution was broken, democracy was destroyed, and a short but bloody civil war showed and increased the contradictions between left and right, between two groups, two camps of the people. It was not difficult for Hitler to invade Austria in March 1938. Austria was wiped out from the map and became a part of Hitler's great Germany. But not only in Austria, in many other parts of Europe, heavy mistakes were done. Many countries developed in dictatorships. Germany, Austria, Horthy in Hungary, Pilsudski in Poland, Mussolini in Italy, a little further away, Franco in Spain, etc. And after World War II, after 1945, there were several people, several statesmen, stateswomen, who said, we must not make the same mistakes again. We need a new approach. We need a new European policy. Think on the excellent French statesmen like Schuman and Monnet. Remember the speech of Winston Churchill in Zurich, in Switzerland, the Marshall Plan from 1947, the wise policy of Konrad Adenauer in Germany, and many other actions. They showed, let us not make the mistakes again, let us open a new chapter, a chapter of cooperation, a chapter of economic and political contacts, etc. Austria was from 1945 till 55, and 55 was the year of our state treaty, was occupied by 4 Allied powers, as you know. It was almost not able to act in foreign policy, on the field of international policy. We could not join the United Nations. We were not allowed to have an army. The Austrian presidents Karl Renner and Theodor Körner, in the 10 years, not a single time left Austria. They made not a single visit to another country, another president, for political cooperation. And the supreme power was the so-called Alliierte Rat, the Allied Council. And this all was changed quite suddenly after the State Treaty from 55, May 55. It had as a consequence the withdrawal of all foreign soldiers. It was in a connection with the decision of Austrian neutrality. It opened many doors for international cooperation. Austria joined the Council of Europe. Austria joined the United Nations. We started our Bundesheer, our own army, and we started with an active foreign policy. And active policy for Austria was particularly meaning to increase the neighborhood policy, to have reasonable relations even to countries in Eastern Europe, to communist-dominated countries. We could be, in that sense, a little bit more flexible than the NATO countries. And we look at the State Treaty as the opening of a new chapter, in particular of our international policy. Joining NATO was not possible and would not have found a majority in the Austrian population. But we were interested on the model of political and economic cooperation in Europe, namely the European Economic Community, EWG, Europäische Wirtschaftsgemeinschaft. But even that was only possible in a very limited, or in de facto, not in a full membership. And there was a period where the European Free Trade Area, EFTA, where we were a member together with Sweden and Switzerland and Finland and Portugal and other countries, was a first step to a European policy, to European cooperation. But when Gorbachev became #1 in the Soviet Union, the possibility for more flexibility, for new ideas in our foreign policy was increasing. And then, I have to be quick and short, came the year 1989, a year, as we all know, of very big changes in Europe, and in particular in Austria's neighborhood. It was the summer 1989, I think it was July, when the Hungarian Foreign Minister Gyula Horn and the Austrian Foreign Minister Alois Mock were cutting symbolically, with many television cameras around them, the Iron Curtain between Austria and Hungary. And in the same month, in summer 1989, Austria sent the application to Brussels, or better to say, to Paris, because France was in the chair of the European Union, for membership in the European Union. And the fall of the Berlin Wall on the 9th of November 1989 of the same year made the chances for membership in the European Union and for participating in the European community and cooperation much bigger. Nevertheless, the negotiations were not easy. The first big problem was Italy, because we had the unsolved problem of South Tyrol. And the Italians say, if you want to join European Union, we must find solutions for this problem. And happily it was found, and some other problems were also overcome. And so the negotiations were successfully ended in 1994. There were fundamental changes in our constitution necessary on the way to Europe. And so we made a referendum on membership, yes or no, saying yes to the result of negotiations or no. And it was exactly 66.6% yes and 33.3 and something % no, 2/3 to 1/3. And on the 1st of January 1995, Austria became member of the European Union. So to say, together with Sweden and Finland, Austria was, Austrian alphabetical order was number 13, Finland number 14, and Sweden number 15 as a member in the European Union. We unhappily lost Norway because the referendum in Norway was negative. By chance, as Speaker of the Austrian Parliament, I was on the Monday after the referendum in Finland, in Oslo, and I found a really weeping Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland, because she was so disappointed that the referendum in Norway was negative. Today, we are now almost 23 years members in the European Union. And I think it is still a solid majority in the Austrian population which is convinced that the joining to the European Union by Austria was good and correct and useful. The most important trading partners of Austria are members of the European Union. The European Union is an instrument of peace policy, and many other elements or arguments are in favor for this membership, for this decision. But still we have, it's changing from year to year, almost 1/3 of Austrians who have voted against in the referendum 1994, and who are still, or their successors or children, or the population is changing, have still reservations or are skeptical vis-à-vis the European integration. We have observed very carefully, not only every year, every 6 months, the mood in the Austrian population vis-à-vis the European Union. And I can tell you that those who were 66 in 94, their number was increasing. And until 99, the approval was 82%. Then came the year 2000, the building of a government between People's Party and Freedom Party, including Mr. Haider as a partner, not as a member of the government, and the sanctions of the European Union, and the sympathy for the European Union significantly was going down on 68% again in the year 2000. And then, year by year, the solidarity to the European Union was growing until 80%, and the economic and financial crisis in 2008 again had a backlash for the sympathy, and the Freedom Party was agitating quite heavily against the European Union and the Austrian membership. And also, I believe, and Mr. Juncker said it very drastically in a speech a few months ago, that the European Union today, for different reasons, including growing differences between the member countries, including some acts of non-solidarity vis-à-vis the European policy, at the moment, the positive approach to the European Union is in Austria rising. I believe it has to do, on the one hand, with the fact that Mr. Trump is president in America, and it has also to do with the phenomenon of Brexit. Both things are such that people have the feeling, well, we should stick together. And if next week the 19th Party Congress in China is opened, and the public interest in the world will look at Peking, and we think that China has about 160 times more inhabitants than Austria, and 3 times more inhabitants as the whole European Union, then you have an additional argument to say Europe needs common policy, needs solidarity, and the European Union is the right instrument for that, even if you may have critiques to that decision or critiques to that policy, etc. And it's interesting that even the Freedom Party, which was for years and years and years the most ardent critical position in Austria against the European Union, now in our election campaign, and we have elections next Sunday in Vienna and in Austria, the Freedom Party says, we're not against membership in the European Union. They gave up the position as the party which is in favor of leaving the European Union, die für den Austritt ist, and after a Brexit, a Ostrixit, or however you would call it, is not popular. And we have this interesting new position. A sensitive question for Austria, of course, is the so-called enlargement. We were profiting from enlargement in 1995, when the Union was growing from 12 to 15 members. And Austria was very much supporting the big enlargement step from 15 to 25 or 27, even 28 members. We think this was right, and it was good, and it was necessary. But of course, you cannot say no to the argument that the European Union, let's say with 6 members, or 12 members, or 15 members, has it easier to make decisions, the decision-making process, the finding of solutions, in particular in those fields where you need full consensus, is more difficult if you have more than 25, etc. members. And this creates a difficult situation vis-à-vis the enlargement which is now on the agenda, because there are 6 countries in the Western Balkan, I don't need to enumerate them, who wait to become members as soon as possible. Serbia and Bosnia and Montenegro and Albania and Kosovo and Bosnia, they have the feeling we are also Europe. And we got many promises about our membership, and now nothing is moving, or not much at least is moving. And here in Austria, the opinions are very divided between those who say, if we think European and if we keep our promises, we must try to finish the negotiations with this country to help them to fulfill the conditions and to accept them. And others say, are you blind vis-à-vis the fact that the enlargement is increasing the problems? Do you really want to shoulder the burden of additional 6 members? And this discussion is not ended now. Then there's the problem of Turkey, of course, but here is the difference only that I, for instance, believe at the moment further negotiations with Turkey don't make much sense. Let's wait, but not smash the doors to close them and to interrupt or stop the negotiations. And others who say, no, Turkey needs this strong act, they don't understand another language. I believe to say at the moment further negotiations don't make sense. Let us not invest more energy in such a thing which is a no-go at the moment. This is also a dispute. Anyway, it is no accident. No, it's not by zufällig. It has good reasons that the fatigue vis-à-vis the European Union is growing, and as I said already, Jean-Claude Juncker and others give very pessimistic statements. One thing is that the enthusiasm on the peace project, European Union, was of course bigger 5 years after the war, or 10 years after the war, when many people have personal memories on the terrible development of the war, than 72 years after the war. Secondly, the economic crisis has disappointed several people who believe it was the fault of the European Union that we got more unemployed people and that our economies didn't grow, at only very small growing. Thirdly, national and nationalistic tendencies in Europe are growing. You could analyze it for each country, how the development in the parliaments is, how the balance between left and right is, etc. But I think nobody can overlook the fact that nationalist groups are gaining weight. And the next issue is that the question of the future of the European Union is totally unclear. Every few months you have a new statement, you have a new proposal. The European Commission has presented a paper with 5 alternatives. But they haven't said, this is the one we want to go. They said, you have, number 1, less Europe, but more efficient. Number 2, let's continue as it is now, status quo. Number 3, concentration of the European Union on economy and less on political matters. Number 4, different speeds, variable geometry. And number 5, deepening, consequent deepening in the direction of economic and political union. And I have the feeling a European Union is, and the Commission in the European Union is not there to say different alternatives are existing. We know it, that different alternatives are existing. You have to lead, you have to fight for a certain goal, you have to make proposals. And a few months after these 5 options, Juncker made his speech, and the first sentence in this speech, if you remember, was, no doubt the European Union is in the deepest crisis ever. And if the President of the Commission says such a sentence, it is also not good for the trust in the Union and for the climate. And a few weeks ago, or days ago, the French President Macron presented his own ideas, and I have no time to comment on them, but it was interesting for me that Mrs. Merkel, being very loyal and solidaric, said, these are in principle very good ideas. I can support them in principle. This was the Prime Minister. But already the Finance Minister said, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And other leading people in Germany were even much more critical than Finance Minister Schäuble. This is the situation of the European Union at the moment, and the problem of refugees, which is particularly a big problem in Austria, for instance, and also in Germany, comes together with all these other problems. So we have a lot of work to do, but I close by saying all this does not and cannot change my deep conviction that the model of a united Europe, of European cooperation, of European solidarity is a very high goal. I was a child when World War II came to an end. These are impressions you never forget. I have been in the last 4 months as well in the United States as in China, strong arguments in favor of a European Union. And when we discuss about our democracy, Churchill is often quoted with the sentence, democracy is a bad system for governing, with the exception of all other systems. And I would say the European Union, as it exists now, is a bad model of European integration, with the exception of all other models which are under discussion. That doesn't mean that we haven't to work, to improve, to discuss, but I'm against all these parties and all these groups which are pretending they have something better than European integration. And this is my answer, my approach to the subject Austria and Europe. Thank you very much.
Dr. Fischer, thank you very much. Nobody, I believe, is surprised that you have delivered a both useful and moving statement. And also, I think one can say, appropriate to what is now the end of the ordinary sessions at this conference. There is only one event left, that's the final panel. We have very few minutes, so I will ask now if there are questions. I am sure there is. Short questions, no long statements, please, because there should be space for as many as possible. The gentleman there, please.
Shlomo Avineri from Israel. Dr. Fischer, you said that Austria has learned from history, and certainly it has learned from the history of the First Republic, where the gap between the blacks and the reds created the civil war and the Ständestaat. And the great achievement of Austria after 1945 was to find the wisdom of the grand coalition between the Socialist Party and the People's Party, which is the Conservative Party. You have elections next week. Are you confident that this grand coalition, with all its problems, everybody knows the problems, will remain and retain the cohesion of Austria as a country where people know how to work with coalitions, know how to make compromises, and therefore know also how to make the compromises with the European Union? Thank you very much.
I can give a very concrete and short answer. Namely, I was always an ardent supporter of great coalitions. As a floor leader in parliament, as a president in the parliament, and as a president of the republic. I had to build 3 governments after the elections, and I always was saying I want a grand coalition, and I got a grand coalition. But after the next elections, I cannot promise you a coalition between Social Democrats and Conservatives for many reasons I have no time to explain. If you ask me, the probability that a coalition between Social Democrats and Conservatives will be the result of the next election, in my opinion, is less than 20%. It is not totally impossible, but the probability is lower than ever since 1945, because the Conservative Freedom Party coalition in 2000 was not expected. It was a total surprise. This time, if you read the Austrian newspapers from today, yesterday, and day before yesterday, or if you listen how Kern, the leader of the Social Democrats, and Kurz speak about each other, you say, this is not the basis for a next coalition.
Thank you, Dr. Fischer. The lady?
Thank you. Dr. Fischer?
Short.
Yeah. Today, the President of the Czech Republic, Mr. Zeman, said in Strasbourg that the annexation of Crimea is a fait accompli and Ukraine should negotiate a better price for it. As a former President of Austria, would you recommend this approach to the violation of state borders?
First of all, I will meet Mr. Zeman tomorrow and I can ask him about the original of his statement and what arguments he has. But to avoid not an answer, I think the annexation of the Crimea by Russia has to be criticized by Europe. We cannot accept this as a fait accompli and say, well, it's not nice, but we can live with it easily. I also criticized it in a speech in Strasbourg, by the way, in the presence of Russian representatives when they still were participating on the plenary sessions. Another thing is that I believe sanctions may be necessary in a certain situation, but sanctions are not a goal in themselves. And if it is possible to come away from sanctions in a presentable way and to show that it doesn't mean that we change our position, it will be good for both sides if we can organize our economic cooperation without sanctions, because sanctions are a contradiction to what we want, namely a reasonable and fair and working trade between countries.
Thank you. Further questions? The gentleman there.
Charles Ross, European Anti-Corruption Center. Dr. Fischer, thank you for taking the time today to come to Prague and Forum 2000 and share your expertise. We are in an interesting time. We're looking at almost 1,000 years of Central European trade. And I think most people will agree that the success of the Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity is of strategic importance to the West. Given your perspective, we can see that in the next 30 years there will be an order of magnitude more money from all sources invested in the reconstruction and integration of Ukraine into the Western economic world than was spent in the Marshall Plan. How do you see this developing, and what are your recommendations, please? Thank you.
I'm not sure whether I understood you correctly, because I don't have recommendations on that field. The development in the Ukraine is a very sad one, a very disappointing one. There were great attempts to find solution. Until now it was not possible, and it is a pain or a wound in our European body. We should overcome it. We should admit that probably even the European Union has made some mistakes in the way how they negotiated the access of or the relation to Ukraine. On the other hand, what happened in the last years from the people in the east of Ukraine, including all sorts of violations of human rights, cannot be accepted, and we have to find a solution. And if we found a solution, economic cooperation can start, and it will start automatically. And I'm always hoping that policy is able to contribute to solutions, and I'm not ready to say the problem is unsolvable and let's continue the status quo forever. This is my approach, if I understood you correctly.
I will allow myself a question. Dr. Fischer, you are the Social Democrat veteran. Can you explain to us what is it that has happened to the classical political parties over the last few years, recently manifested in the defeat, or say the losses, of the Social Democrats in Germany, in France, and most probably within a few days in Austria and in Scandinavia, which is, so to say, my home basis. What is happening here?
I wrote a little book which was published 3 weeks ago, together with the president of the economic chamber in Austria, a conservative. And happily, in the last weeks, it is always a number 2 or 3 in the Austrian bestseller list. I'm very proud, but I cannot repeat the whole book. But saying 2 sentences, it is a crisis of social democrats, but it is also a crisis of the traditional parties. Because if I look at Italy, at France, at Austria, even in Germany, the parties which had 45–50%, even absolute majorities, have half of the votes of that time, or 2/3, or even 1/3. And I believe that we must understand it from the political structures which were created in the end of the 19th century, had their peak many decades in the 20th centuries, this strong organization, this strong solidarity inside the party, the mass membership, the information process inside the parties with Vertrauensleuten, with cadres. And this doesn't work anymore in the modern information society with email, etc., etc. The Social Democrats were almost a church, and the conservatives were even more ideologically a church. Now you have totally mixed information fields. The Social Democratic Party in the time of Bruno Kreisky had 710,000 members. Now it has 180,000 members. The Conservative Party similar, the SPD similar. I believe that the type of parties which were dominating in the second half of the 20th century in many European countries have lost lots of their basis and of their roots. And this makes a crisis, and at the moment, the crisis hits the social democratic movement even more than the Christian Democrats, but it hits both philosophies, and we have to await substantial changes in the political systems, in the way how parties are organized, how movements are organized, how elections are organized. But I hope that it will be on the basis of working democracy with human rights, etc. We have not a fallback, but we have totally new systems. This is my belief.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fischer. Thank you, I believe, from the audience. We have had the pleasure of listening to a politician, a statesman, a democrat, a philosopher, which has played an important role at the beginning of this century. And I can only say, but I think I can say it on behalf of the audience, what do we say even in English? Well, I will have to turn around to be a positive sentence and say, we are sure that your students in Innsbruck are looking forward to listening to you. It has been a pleasure having you here. Thank you very much.
Tack så mycket.